There is a moment in the 6th season that the fandom has picked apart to the molecular level, but for some reason, they missed the main point. Hodor. Hold the door. Bran Stark, while in the present, shattered young Willis's mind in the past. A single action across time broke a man for his entire life, turning a healthy boy into a being capable of speaking only one word. And most viewers took this as Hodor's tragedy, as a bitter surprise, as another goodbye to a beloved character in true Martin style. But there was a different message in that scene, a silent and far more disturbing one. If Bran could break one man's mind in the past, what was stopping him from trying to break another's? The rulers of Westeros heard whispers and lost their minds. One of them screamed, "Burn them all," for hours on end, at the very end of his reign, as the world around him was collapsing. And almost no one asked, where exactly did this mantra come from? What lies behind it? Today, we're going to break down one of the most provocative fan theories in the A Song of Ice and Fire universe. The theory that the Mad King wasn't actually mad. That behind his mantra wasn't a decaying mind in the final stages of psychosis, but a message about the dead who are coming from the north. And that Bran Stark could have been the one who sent it without knowing it would kill the recipient. A disclaimer up front, this is a theory, not canon. It's beautiful, complex, with strong arguments and serious holes. I've dug up everything there is to dig up on this topic. Aerys' canonical madness, the mechanics of Bran's powers, precedents from the books and the show, and Martin's own statements. We will honestly examine every clue and every objection. By the end, you'll have everything you need to reach your own verdict. Before we build the theory, let's establish what is definitely known. This is important because any speculation must stand on a foundation of facts, not hover above it. I'll start with exactly that, because only from here can we honestly understand where the facts end and the territory of assumptions begins. Aerys II Targaryen ruled Westeros from 262 to 283 AC, 21 years on the Iron Throne, a reign that began with great hope. Young, charming, full of ambition, the only son of Jaehaerys II. His closest childhood friend was Tywin Lannister, heir to Casterly Rock, and in the first years of their joint rule, Aerys and Tywin together lifted up the Seven Kingdoms. Maester Aemon in A Feast for Crows remembered him fondly. He was a man of immense charm, whose outbursts were initially forgiven because he was charismatic and generous, and these outbursts seemed minor. Lords and commoners alike loved him. And then began what historians would call the Fall, a slow, multi-year process documented by a variety of sources. Maester Yandel in The World of Ice and Fire notes, as early as the 260s, Aerys had outbursts, grand schemes that were quickly forgotten, and inconsistent actions. Courtiers explained it away as youth. Then they stopped explaining. In the 270s, things became more serious. A multitude of miscarriages and stillborn children for Queen Rhaella. 3 sons died in infancy. Growing paranoia toward Tywin, suspicions directed at his own son, Rhaegar, and small cruelties that were no longer so easily forgiven. And then, in 277 AC, something happened that broke him completely. The Defiance of Duskendale. Lord Daenerys Darklyn trapped the king, hoping to gain trade privileges. Aerys spent half a year in a dungeon. He was tortured with petty humiliations. His beard was tugged, he was mocked. Tywin besieged the city from the outside, but was in no hurry. According to some chroniclers, he understood that Westeros would be better governed under Rhaegar. Sir Barristan Selmy, acting alone, eventually freed the king. The Aerys who emerged from Duskendale was a different man. For 4 years, he did not leave the Red Keep. He forbade blades in his presence, even for trimming his nails or cutting his beard. He began to see traitors in every shadow.
growing paranoia became the norm at court.
By 283 AC, when Robert's rebellion ignited and armies flooded Westeros, his madness reached its peak. Jaime Lannister later told Brienne, "The Mad King ordered King's Landing filled with caches of wildfire, under every district, under the Great Sept of Baelor, under taverns and stables, even under the Red Keep itself." Everyone knew Tywin Lannister would betray him. And when Tywin's forces entered the city under the guise of allies, and Pycelle convinced Aerys to open the gates, the Mad King gave the final order: burn it all. 500,000 lives. Burn them all. Burn them in their homes. Burn them in their beds. Jaime killed Rossart, the head pyromancer, and then killed the king himself before the order could be carried out. That is canon, a 20-year history of mounting paranoia, reinforced by real blows of fate, ending in a plan to destroy his own city. The explanations for this history are complete, detailed, and leave no obvious gaps. Now let's establish the second part of the foundation, what exactly we know about the powers of Bran Stark. Bran, according to both book and show canon, possesses two rare abilities that are seldom found together. The first, a warg, meaning he is capable of entering the minds of animals and seeing through their eyes. Most families with wolf blood keep this a secret. In Westeros, it is considered something wild and inhuman. The second, a green seer, meaning he gains access to events of the past, present, and partially the future through the weirwood net. These trees have stood for thousands of years. They have seen everything. The three-eyed raven tells Bran in the books, "The past is already written. The ink is dry. You cannot change what has been." But Hodor refutes this maxim. Or perhaps he doesn't refute it, but clarifies it, and does so cruelly. Bran did not change the past. He was present in it. And his presence, his attempt to act through young Willis at the same time he was in the vision of young Willis, broke the boy in a way that became part of the unchangeable history, a closed loop. The three-eyed raven led Bran to this specific memory. It had to be this way because it had already happened. The show offered another precedent. Bran, while in a vision of the Tower of Joy, called out to his father. Ned Stark turned. He heard something, though he saw nothing. A pause, a look back. Then he continued toward the tower. In the books, A Dance with Dragons has a similar scene. Bran sees Ned through the Winterfell weirwood, and Ned seems to notice something. This means Bran's voice is capable of reaching people in the past, like a whisper, like a wind that can be mistaken for a hallucination. That is the soil for our theory, the precedent of a solitary whisper that a person hears, and the precedent of a catastrophic mental contact that breaks a mind. Both exist in canon. And now, let's look at the first clue and immediately test it honestly. The first clue is simple and obvious. The mantra, burn them all. Aerys repeated it for hours in the final hours of his life. Every viewer who has watched the show or read the books knows this. But here is the question almost no one asks out loud. What exactly was he planning to burn? In the canonical explanation, the answer lies on the surface. People. The residents of King's Landing, whom he considered traitors. Robert's armies. Tywin's forces. Everyone who wanted to take his city. This is the interpretation that lies on the surface, and it has powerful confirmation. Jaime tells Brienne that Aerys was shouting exactly this when he ordered the entire city to be burned. The context is clear. But the theory asks an uncomfortable question. What if the words are correct, but the object is not? What if them in Aerys' head didn't mean the townspeople, the traitors, or Robert's armies, but something else entirely? Something he was trying to convey but couldn't express more precisely because his mind was already broken. The army of the dead is killed by fire. That is not an opinion, it is a fact of the universe. A white is destroyed by flame. Jaime killed the Mad King in 283 AC. Decades passed before the living finally faced the threat from the north face to face. But the three-eyed raven does not exist in linear time. He sees the past. And according to the theory, Bran Stark, already mastering his powers or having already become the three-eyed raven, could have observed the threat of the army of the dead long before it became real. The White Walkers were returning slowly. The wall had stood for thousands of years. But a green seer looking through the weirwood net is not tied to a specific year. For him, history is open in both directions. Now, honestly, why is this clue weaker than it seems at first glance? Because the mantra, "burn them all," has a completely obvious canonical explanation. It requires no additional construction. Aerys was a paranoid man who saw traitors in everyone he met. He burned hands, he burned lords, he burned Rickard Stark alive in his armor, while his son Brandon choked on his own noose, trying to save his father. Fire had long been Aerys' favorite method. Them, in the mantra, is simply everyone he considered an enemy, real enemies of his present, Robert's armies, Tywin's forces. Occam's razor says the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Why introduce Bran if everything is clear without him? The answer? For no reason, if you look only at the mantra. But there is something else, something that is harder to explain with just paranoia and a love for fire. Because next, I found a detail that is almost never mentioned in discussions of this theory, but it is exactly what makes the conversation more interesting. Let's talk about Rhaegar Targaryen, because without him, the theory loses half its weight and becomes just a beautiful fantasy. Rhaegar was not just a talented knight and future king, he was a man obsessed with prophecy, from his very youth. Maester Aemon in A Feast for Crows recalled, when Rhaegar was young, they both believed that Rhaegar himself was the prince that was promised, the one born of salt and smoke under a bleeding star. Who would stand against the darkness when the long night came? Whose is the song of ice and fire? Rhaegar read something in the ancient books of Dragonstone that convinced him he had to do something important, something related to a threat that others didn't see or preferred to ignore. He was the son of the Mad King. He lived beside him. He saw his decay from the inside, from his very childhood. And yet, he dedicated a significant part of his life to studying the threat from the north, the prophecies of the long night, and preparing for something no one around him was thinking about. Why? Because the blood of the dragon flowed in the Targaryens, the blood of people who came from Valyria with a prophecy. They knew about the long night. They remembered. They made plans. Their ancestors fled Valyria shortly before the Doom precisely because someone of the Targaryen line had seen the future and warned the family. Prophecy and vision were part of their heritage. Here is what is interesting in this context. Rhaegar was preparing for the threat of the others in parallel with his father slowly losing his mind. One son of the Targaryen era knew about the threat and acted rationally. The other, his father, screamed, "Burn them all," in a final psychosis. A random coincidence of the themes of the two most significant Targaryens of one generation? The theory says no. The theory says that both of them were dealing with the same thing. Only Rhaegar received information through prophecy and books, through an institutional channel, through a language that his mind was prepared to perceive. And Aerys, if the theory is correct, received it directly, through mental contact from the future, through a channel for which his consciousness was not equipped, and he could not cope. But here we need to stop and check the mechanism itself. Before accepting this beautiful parallel, let's figure out, can Bran even do what the theory suggests? And if he can, then why Aerys specifically? Remember this question. We will return to it when the full picture is before us. The question of the mechanism. Is Bran capable of intentionally sending messages into the past? Here, the theory relies on the precedent of Hodor, but an honest check shows that the precedent is not perfect. You cannot simply say, Hodor proved it and close the topic. You need to figure out exactly what happened to Hodor and how it relates to what the theory requires of Bran in the case of Aerys. What happened with Hodor is this. Bran warged into him in the present at the same time he was in a vision of the past, where young Willis was also present. This created a double connection through time. Young Willis in the past lived his own death in advance, finding himself in the mind of the adult Hodor at the moment of his demise. This broke his mind. He spent his whole life between 2 points in time, unable to become a full person, only a vessel for one command. This mechanism is unique. Bran did not send a message. He accidentally created a loop of consciousness. The book rules say otherwise. In A Dance with Dragons, the three-eyed crow explains directly to Bran, "The past is already written. The ink is dry. You cannot change anything." When Bran saw Ned through the weirwood and called out to him, Ned turned. But the three-eyed crow explained it as a hallucination. Ned heard the wind, the rustling of leaves, one voice that could be mistaken for the wind. So we have a gap between what the theory requires and what the canon confirms. The theory requires that Bran be able not just to whisper into the past, but to interact with a specific person for hours, so intensely that it formed a multi-year obsession in him. The canon confirms Bran once accidentally did something similar with Hodor through double warging, and once intentionally tried to call out to Ned, but achieved only a fleeting sensation. Between a fleeting sensation and a multi-year breakdown of the mind, there is a huge fundamental abyss. This is where the theory truly stalls. And honestly, this is the strongest counter-argument, stronger even than the canonical history of Aerys' madness. But the theory has an answer, not a perfect one, but a logical one. Hodor happened because double warging, simultaneous presence in 2 points in time, and contact through both created a catastrophic overload. The theory suggests Bran did not just whisper to Aerys, he tried to enter into a deeper mental contact. Maybe he tried to warg into him like an animal because Bran still controlled his powers poorly. Maybe he tried to transmit a vision, an image, a picture of the army of the bed. It was this contact, incompatible with a human mind that has no warg protection and no magical nature of the Starks, that broke the king. Not one message, an attempt to carry a message directly without language through direct transmission of images. Martin said in an interview that magic in his world is not safe. Looking at the others with an unprotected mind can be catastrophic. Touching the weirwood network without preparation is painful. If someone with Bran's power were to try to directly invade the mind of a person from the past without their consent and without their magical nature, the consequences could be exactly like that. Growing paranoia, which the person explains to themselves through categories available to them. Voices that the person does not understand, turning into hallucinations. A message that becomes an obsession, detached from the original meaning. This is not proof. This is a hypothesis of a mechanism. It is logical. It is consistent with the Hodor precedent, but it goes beyond what we have seen in the canon. Let's look at one more clue. This time, it concerns the madness of Aerys himself and his chronology, because here, the theory faces an especially difficult question, and dodging it is not honest. If Bran sent Aerys a vision of the White Walkers, it should have changed something in the king's behavior, appeared in some way, left a trace. Was there such a trace? Look at the chronology. Aerys' madness grew gradually and was documented. Already in the 60s, the first signs, mood swings, grandiose unrealized plans. In the 70s, the first serious episodes, suspicions, small cruelties, quarrels with Tywin.
Duskendale in 277 was a turning point, after which paranoia became total. This does not look like one moment that broke him under the influence of an external force. This looks like a gradual process that has obvious internal causes.
But wait, because this is exactly where the theory has an unobvious turn that I did not expect to find. The theory does not say that Bran made Aerys mad from scratch. It does not claim this in any of its versions. The theory says the predisposition was there, Duskendale was there, paranoia was growing, and it was into this context, into an already shaken mind, into an already affected consciousness, that something alien arrived, something that a person with a healthy and protected psyche might have perceived differently or not noticed at all. This fundamentally changes the picture. The theory does not try to explain all of Aerys' madness through Bran. It says the final stage, the obsession with the mantra, the specific fixation to burn them all, could have had another source besides natural decay, or in addition to it. A mind already destroyed by Duskendale could have been exactly the substrate into which mental contact from the future penetrated most deeply. A crack through which the whisper leaked and remained and could no longer be pulled back out. Maester Yandel in The World of Ice and Fire records that by the late period, Aerys had not just paranoia and suspicion, but specifically hallucinations, voices, images. He saw traitors where there were none, heard conspiracies in ordinary conversations. This is already beyond simple paranoia supported by real enemies. This is something he heard and saw that was not there. The canon does not explain what exactly. The explanation through genetics and mental disorder is sufficient. The theory offers its own, the army of the dead, which Bran saw and which Aerys could not withstand. There is one more detail that is usually missed. Varys, the show's Jaime in the third season, telling Brienne about his killing of the king, says, "The ramp of paranoia about traitors everywhere was amplified by Varys' influence. It was Varys who whispered to Aerys about conspiracies, literally whispered." And Jaime bitterly remarks, at the most important moment when he needed to listen to Varys, Aerys did not listen to him, although Varys warned him against letting Tywin in through the gates. This is a detail that adds another layer to the image of the king, around whom people walked with whispers, and who could no longer distinguish one whisper from another. If in this stream of whispers there was one more, inhuman, coming from beyond time, Aerys' mind had no chance to recognize it as a separate source. A strong argument. But an honest skeptic will say, hallucinations in a paranoid schizophrenic, which, judging by the descriptions, the late Aerys was, are a medical norm without any brands. The explanation through illness is simpler and more convincing, and we cannot refute this objection, but we can go further. Why burn them all and not kill them all? This seems like an insignificant question, until you think about it for longer than a few minutes. Then it becomes one of the most interesting details in the entire theory. Aerys killed people in different ways. He executed Rickard Stark with fire, that is true, but he also ordered hanging, beheading, torture, throwing into the dungeon. His love for fire was personal, formed over years, part of his identity. Targaryens and fire are inseparable. Aerys dreamed that he would burn and be reborn as a dragon. This is not an external trait. This is a central idea of his self-perception. And yet, burn them all as a final, soul, repeated for hours mantra. Not destroy them all, not kill them all, not the traitors will die, not the gods will punish you. Specifically, burn. Burn. Again and again. Fire kills those whom steel does not take. A wight infected with death is destroyed by flame. This is an established fact of Martin's universe. Jon Snow sets fire to a White's hand in the first book. The fire of seers kills the dead. The White Walkers fear fire. The last hero of the Long Night, legends of whom are scattered throughout the text, defeated the darkness with fire. Azor Ahai forged Lightbringer, a blade of living flame. If you are trying to transmit a message to a person in the past about how to defeat the army of the dead, fire would be the first word in that message, the first and the main one. This is the means, this is the method. Now the skeptic will object, but Aerys chose fire long before any possible contact with Bran. He burned people with pleasure. This is his personal trait, built into him through the Targaryen obsession with fire and dragons. A love for fire does not require an external source. True, but the theory does not say that Bran gave Aerys a love for fire. The theory says that Bran could have resonated with what was already there, to choose for his message exactly the person in whose head fire already lived as a central symbol. Or conversely, Aerys himself, receiving an incomprehensible mental signal that his mind could not identify as external, interpreted it through his own system of symbols. The message, destroy the army of the dead. The interpretation, of a disintegrated mind, burn everything. This is beautiful. This explains the specificity of the mantra better than simple paranoia. But this is still speculation. We emphasize this. We do not have a single textual clue. Moving on to the strongest part of the theory. The Bran precedent. One of the most compelling details of this theory isn't found in the history of Aerys, but in the history of House Stark, or rather, in the names of this house throughout the millennia. In the Stark line, the name Brandon appears with striking frequency. Brandon the Builder raised the wall 8,000 years ago. Brandon the Shipwright sailed across the Sunset Sea and never returned. Brandon the Bad, Brandon the Burned, whose father, incidentally, was burned. Brandon the Shipwright, wait, that's a different one. Several Brandons from different eras, different centuries. This name appears in the Stark line with such frequency that you start to think this isn't just a tradition, it's something else. This angle of the theory was popularized by a Reddit user named Turmoil26. His argument is structured as follows. The three-eyed raven sent Bran Stark into the past again and again, trying to prevent the threat of the others in different ways and in different eras. Every time, failure. Every time, a dead end. Either his mind couldn't take it, or the scale of the task proved insurmountable. Brandon the Builder raised the wall because he couldn't stop the threat any other way, and it was his last resort. Brandon the Bad may have tried to change something at an earlier point, and the Mad King became yet another failed attempt when Bran tried to prepare a ruling monarch for the threat and broke him instead. This is a very bold assumption. It requires accepting that one name over thousands of years means one person traveling back in time. The canon does not explicitly confirm this. The name Brandon in Westeros is about as common as Robert is in England. It might be significant. It might be a coincidence. Martin hasn't specified. However, there is something canonical in the very idea that a greenseer is capable of acting across time at several points. The three-eyed raven tells Bran in the 6th season of the show, the Night King will come for him. He has tried before, many times, with many three-eyed ravens. This means the confrontation between the Greenseers and the threat from the north didn't start with our Bran. It has lasted for millennia. Three-eyed ravens existed before him, and they died. The Night King killed them one by one. If three-eyed ravens have been trying to contain the threat for millennia, it is logical to assume they tried different tools and different strategies. One of them could have been an attempt to warn specific rulers of the past, those who possessed the resources and armies to confront the threat. One such ruler could have been Aerys, not because he was the best choice, but because someone had to be sitting on the Iron Throne at the critical moment when the threat could still be stopped. The argument for the precedent of a millennial confrontation is confirmed by the show's canon. Attempts to influence history and specific people exist, and not just with our Bran. The logic of successive failures explains why the world ended up on the brink of destruction by the events of the main series anyway. The argument against this is show canon. In the books, the mechanics of the three-eyed raven and his confrontation with the Night King are not spelled out as explicitly. Furthermore, the fact that the Night King tried before means he tried to kill the three-eyed ravens, not that the three-eyed ravens themselves were trying to actively intervene. These are different directions of the same confrontation. We have gathered enough evidence. Let's now put together the full picture of the theory and honestly evaluate what parts of it hold up to scrutiny. The theory, in a coherent form, sounds like this. Brandon Stark, while mastering his greenseer powers, or already possessing them fully, observes the threat of the White Walkers through the weirwood net. He sees the army of the dead, sees that it is coming, and sees that the living have no time. Somewhere during the period of Aerys' escalating madness, when the king's mind is already shattered by the defiance of Duskendale and years of paranoia, Bran tries to establish mental contact. Perhaps he tries to warg into him. Perhaps he simply speaks into the past, but more persistently and intensely than he did with Ned at the Tower of Joy. Aerys' mind, unprotected and already cracked, cannot withstand it. The message about the army of the dead that must be burned turns into an obsessive mantra, detached from its source. A bitter irony. The attempt to warn the king about the real threat exacerbated his madness to the point where he nearly destroyed 500,000 people. Jaime prevented this by killing both Rosart and the king. But the wildfire, planted throughout the city on the orders of the broken Aerys, turned out to be the very preparation that Cersei later used. What is strong in this version? The precedent exists. Hodor proved that Bran can break a mind in the past. This isn't just a beautiful metaphor, it is a documented fact of the universe. The burn them all mantra is specific. Fire as a method, rather than just destruction, correlates more with the fight against the undead than with the usual tyrannical paranoia of a murderer. Rhaegar's chronology. The son of the Mad King knew about the threat and was preparing for it. His father screamed, "Burn them all." The parallel between two Targaryens of the same generation, one of whom acted rationally and the other psychotically, but both in the context of the same threat, is no coincidence. The precedent of a millennial confrontation creates a context in which the attempt to influence rulers of the past looks not insane, but logical. What is weak? The chronology of Aerys' madness does not require an external cause. It is explained entirely through Duskendale, the loss of his children, paranoia, and genetics. Nothing is left unexplained. The gap between a whisper that is a fleeting sensation and a multi-year psychosis is enormous. There is no canonical evidence that Bran is capable of the latter, only the former. Aerys' love for fire was formed long before any possible contact with Bran. The mantra could have been a product of his own psychology. The entire theory is built on one precedent, Hodor, who himself is an exception, not the rule. And even that happened accidentally, not intentionally. Now, the author's perspective. Why did Martin write this story exactly this way? The madness of Aerys II Targaryen is documented in The World of Ice and Fire in detail and explained through a combination of factors. Martin leaves no room for mystery where human causes are sufficient. He gives the reader the tools to understand how this man fell. Genetics, Duskendale, losses, envy of Tywin, paranoia that Varys intentionally exacerbated. This is important because if Martin had wanted to embed an element of future intervention into Aerys' story, he almost certainly would have left a canonical hook in the text.
Martin is not stingy with clues for those who read carefully. R plus L equals J was hidden in the text from the first volume. Hints, scraps, half-phrases. Hodor's story was laid out long before it was revealed. Martin builds his mysteries so that a rereading reader can find the threads. For the theory about Aerys, there are no such threads. Not a single line in the books that would directly indicate that the whisper in Aerys' head was anything other than a symptom of psychosis. The absence of a thread doesn't prove the theory is wrong. Sometimes Martin is silent on purpose, but it makes the theory less likely. Is there room in Martin's authorial style for such twists? Definitely. He loves reinterpreting villains. Jaime, the Kingslayer, whom everyone called a traitor, turned out to be the man who saved 500,000 lives at the cost of his own honor. This is the central theme of his arc. The Mad King, who actually received a message about a real threat but couldn't handle it, would be completely in the spirit of Martin. The tragedy, not of a villain, but of a man broken by a communicative act that exceeded his capabilities. But one difference is fundamental. Martin wrote Jaime's story and put it into the text as an authorial intent. The story of Aerys as a recipient of Bran's visions exists only in the fandom space, not in the books. Parallels with real history also work in both directions. Historians agree that Aerys is inspired by Henry VI of England, the Mad King from the Wars of the Roses, and Charles VI of France, who in his mad episodes believed he was made of glass. Both went mad without any interference from the future. Both destroyed their reigns through internal causes. Martin gave us the same story, only in a world where magic exists. And that is precisely why the question of the theory doesn't die, because in a world of magic, the boundary between psychosis and mental contact is not obvious. This is not our world. Here, a mind can be broken from the outside. Here, whispers from the past are confirmed by canon. And if the rule, the ink is dry, is an absolute, as Hodor showed, then what else does it not cover? Final assessment. Plausibility scale. This theory falls into the beautiful but unlikely category. Not because it lacks arguments. The arguments exist and they are not trivial. The Hodor precedent is real and proven. The specificity of the mantra is unusual and deserves attention. The parallel with Rhaegar is intriguing. The millennial confrontation of the Green Seers and the Night King creates the right context. But other factors tip the scales. The chronology of Aerys' madness is fixed and explained without any brands. The absence of canonical hooks in the books, despite the fact that theories of comparable scale always had them. The gap between the capabilities the canon has confirmed and those the theory requires. The simplest explanation still works better than the complex one. What could confirm or refute future text? If in The Winds of Winter or A Dream of Spring, Bran ends up in a vision where he directly interacts with Aerys or sees him as part of his history, it will change everything. If the three-eyed raven says something like, "You already tried with this king, it didn't work," the theory will become canon. If not, the theory will remain beautiful and will never receive confirmation. There is also a broader Bran is all the Brans theory, which includes the story of Aerys as one of the episodes. If one accepts the grand version, the story with the Mad King becomes almost inevitable. If the grand version is rejected, the minor one loses a significant part of its support. I consider the grand version overloaded. Hodor was an exception, not a rule. Building a millennial history of time jumps on one exception is difficult. Comparison with competing explanations. The canonical explanation of Aerys' psychosis is more convincing and richer in detail. It leaves no gaps. The theory fills a space that is already filled without it. Back to where we started. There's a moment in the 6th season that the fandom picked apart down to the molecules. Yet, for some reason, they missed the main point. Hodor, hold the door. We realized that Bran is capable of accidentally breaking a mind in the past. And later, while re-examining the story of the Mad King, some of us asked the question, what if it was intentional, just once? We went through the mechanics, through Aerys' timeline, through the specifics of the mantra, through the parallel with Rhaegar, through the precedent of the 1,000-year conflict. We found arguments. We tested them, honestly. We found holes. We tested those too. Here is my position. I don't think the Mad King saw the White Walkers in the way the theory claims. Martin gave us a story of Aerys' downfall that is far too detailed and humanly convincing to layer something else on top of it. Duskendale is enough. The loss of his children is enough. Varys and his whispers are enough. There is no need to add a mental contact from the future.
But here is what I do think. The theory asks the right question. Not, was Aerys mad, but what does madness mean in a world where a mind can be broken across time? And who bears responsibility for a message that destroys its recipient? If Bran once caused Hodor to live his entire life broken for the sake of a minute that was needed in the future, then the question of a Greenseer's responsibility ceases to be abstract. It's a question about the cost of knowledge, the cost of action, about what happens when someone who sees everything tries to change even the smallest thing. And that is exactly why the theory won't die, even when it's debunked. Because behind it lies more than just the story of Aerys. Behind it lies a fear. What if the man who went mad didn't do it in vain? What if he just couldn't find the words for what he saw? What if burn them all was the right answer, spoken at the wrong time, in the wrong place, and by the wrong lips? The Mad King screamed it for hours. Jaime killed him to save 500,000 lives. And then Daenerys came, and the dragon burned them all. Let me know what you think in the comments. Did the theory hold up, or did it fall apart? And subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown.